talk about these mobile death units that the Nazis set up, the ones that the people who were involved in these operations, the ones you're going after now. You talk about those. Those were set up where? Mostly in Russia?
They were sent to accompany the Wehrmacht, the German army, when it invaded the Soviet Union, which was actually Eastern Poland. There was the third of Poland that had been occupied by the Russians. That's where the border was, between Nazi Germany or Nazi-occupied Poland and Russian-occupied Poland. They accompanied the troops as they entered the Soviet Union in something called Operation Barbarossa. It was the biggest invasion ever in military history. And they followed the troops, and in the areas that were liberated, they immediately started organizing the mass murders. Now, one thing that is very important to understand. Only in Eastern Europe did collaboration with the Nazis include participation in systematic mass murder. In other words, everywhere in Europe, in the countries occupied by Nazi Germany or allied with Nazi Germany, the Nazis tried to enlist local helpers. And there were three reasons for it. One was ideological, two were practical. Ideological is they wanted to show that the local population supports the measures they're taking against the quote unquote enemies of the Reich, primarily Jews, but not only Jews, communists, mentally ill, handicapped, etc., Jehovah's Witnesses. The two other reasons, one was they were short on manpower. Okay, they controlled an area from the gates of Moscow, the gates of Leningrad, all the way to Normandy, from Narvik and Trondheim in northern Norway to the Greek islands, and everywhere except Britain, of course, and the neutrals. In other words, Spain and Portugal, Turkey, Ireland, Switzerland,
right.
Sweden. So, in other words, that entire area was under their control. They're about to launch an unprecedented mass murder operation. And in the beginning, you're not talking about gas chambers. This is not stuffing 150 people into a gas chamber and murdering them in a matter of minutes. This is individual murder. And I'll give you an example. In Lithuania, I just published a book not long ago on Lithuanian complicity in the Holocaust called Our People, Discovering Lithuania's Hidden Holocaust. There were less than 1,000 Germans during the Nazi occupation of Lithuania. 220,000 Jews lived in Lithuania during the Nazi occupation, of whom 212,000 were murdered. 90% of them were murdered by shooting near their homes, in forests, right near where they lived, individually shot, men, women, and children. How do you pull off a thing like that? You need massive assistance from the local collaborators. And in Lithuania, that's what happened. And the tragedy now, and what I'm fighting against this for years, is that the narrative in Lithuania is the Holocaust was a terrible tragedy. The Nazis came in, murdered our Jews. 1 second. They murdered your Jews, only them? You know what? There were a few marginal elements in Lithuanian society, degenerates. They're not part of us.
Babi Yar, same situation.
Exactly.
Everybody was shot.
Exactly the
Everybody
same.
was shot.
33,771 victims. And how do I know the number? The bodies were exhumed by the Soviets. September 29th, 30th, 1941. And for years, by the way, there was no mark on this spot. And then some genius in the Kiev municipality wanted to build a football stadium there.
Yeah.
So Yevgeny Yevtushenko, the famous Russian poet, non-Jewish, published his poem, Babi Yar, a cry on behalf of the victims, and they dropped the idea. And there was a little monument to the victims of fascism.
And you're saying there are no bodies there anymore?
No, the bodies are there. The bodies are there. No, what I'm saying is there was nothing to mark the spot. There was
but I thought, did you say that they dug up some bodies?
No, they exhumed. They did an exhumation to estimate the number of victims, but then they covered it up.
And then they covered it up, right?
Russians did it. The Soviets did it in several places. It wasn't only in Babi Yar, but.
And Babi Yar, it's just a ravine. I've been there, and as you said, there's no marker, but they're talking about now building a monument. Natan Sharansky is heading this group that's going to. Are you familiar with that?
Of course. course, I'm familiar with it. But I'm telling you, Ukraine and Lithuania are the major offenders in terms of Holocaust distortion. And the book that I wrote this book with a Lithuanian author, non-Jewish Lithuanian author, who discovered that her uncle and her grandfather were involved in the killings, in the murder of Jews. And she was looking for a way to atone for this. Her name is Ruta Vanagaita. And we went on a mission to 40 places. In Lithuania, there's 234 Holocaust graves. We went to 35 in Lithuania and 5 in Belarus, where a Lithuanian unit was sent by the Nazis to murder Jews in Belarus. They murdered 20,000 Jews in 15 months, in 41 and 42. And we went to see, can you find the places? So we found almost every place. Are they marked? Some aren't, a few aren't, but are they neglected? Undoubtedly. And we went to local museums. We went to Panovich, the famous city of Panovich, with its great yeshiva. I asked the person in charge of PR in the museum, I said to him, is there anything here about the community? 7,000 Jews murdered. He says, no. I said, are you aware of the fact that millions of people all over the world know the name of your city? He goes, why? I said, you know the bakery opposite the bus station? That's the edifice of the Panovich Yeshiva. And I explained to him what yeshiva is and you know why it's important. And it was rebuilt in Israel, Rabbi Kahneman, the whole story. He was in shock. I said to Ruta, I said, they murdered us, they inherited us, and they erased us. So this is the book. The book created a huge scandal in Lithuania. It came out first in Lithuanian, and ultimately my co-author had to flee Lithuania because she was under threat for doing what she did. In other words, she said, "Oh, you must work for the Russians. You must be Putin's agent, or you work for the Jews, or you're getting paid by both of them."
And she said, "No, I'm the relative of the people who did this."
No, this was an enormous shock, absolutely enormous shock in Lithuania. The book became a bestseller, but later on, they took revenge against her because she questioned some initiative of the government, and they got the publishers to take all her books out of the bookstores a day after she launched an autobiography. So 27,000 copies were removed, and no one will buy her books.
No.
And she ran away to Israel she was in Israel for 3 years, just to escape. The father of Lithuanian independence, Landsbergis, wrote in an op-ed that now that you've betrayed the country, why don't you just go commit suicide?
The people don't want to remember, they don't want to acknowledge, they don't want to what?
Listen, there are some people who do, very few, and there are even Lithuanian historians who wrote the truth more or less about the Holocaust, but no one reads it. It's academic scholarship. It has had absolutely no impact or effect on the government. The government narrative is nothing to do with us. Tragedy, terrible, boo-hoo-hoo, we lost our Jews. But
And what,
Stewart, I don't want to be too much of a self-promoter, but the book just came out in English now. It's called Our People. And the picture on the cover is of two faces. One of a Jew who represented Lithuania in 2 Olympics as a cyclist, 24 and 28, Yitzhak Anolik, and one of the murderers. And they look more or less similar. So Ruta says about the Jewish cyclist, she said, good enough to represent us in the Olympics, not good enough to live. Murdered in the Kovna ghetto. The murderer was in Ponar, where they murdered 70,000 Jews.
there have been a number of movies about you and your activities. Are there any on Netflix, or can we see them?
I'll tell you, the movie, the trial of the Accountant of Auschwitz is on Netflix.
What's that name?
The Accountant of Auschwitz is on
Trial of the
Netflix.
Accountant of Auschwitz.
Okay, Oscar Groening. Right. Okay. Great. Well, we'll have to.
That's on Netflix, and I think, I'm not sure, there's a series by the BBC called The Last Nazis. And one episode is about my search for Dr. Aribert Heim, who was a notorious sadist at Mauthausen. He was like a mini Mengele. And I went to South America to try and find him. So they followed me, and they did a great job. It was probably the best movie ever made about me.
Oh,
So,
wow. Wow.